It is the morning after Gang Green's ugly 10-9 loss at home to the Denver Broncos. We've got some things to talk about. I'm Glenn Naughton with Jet Nation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what's the most angry and active Jets message board on the web. As you can imagine, fans not very happy. Why should they be? As we talked about last night, and you all know by now, Robert Saleh finds a way to lose to a rookie quarterback in his fourth career start while the rookie is playing on the road in bad weather against a future Hall of Fame quarterback. You can't make it up, folks. So Robert Saleh met with the press. Actually, before we get to the Robert Saleh meeting with the press, I talked about this after week one. I talked about it again yesterday. Robert Saleh was asked about it week one. He was asked about it again yesterday. And it's not just Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen is only the most obvious example. We've talked a few times now about how the Jets are not using Braylon Allen on a regular basis on short yardage situations. And when I say not on a regular basis, I mean I can only think of one or two instances where they did, whereas I can think of multiple instances in which they used Brees Hall and came up short. We saw it yesterday on the goal line. Jets had first and goal from the one, got stuffed twice in a row, running Brees Hall up the middle while Braylon Allen was on the sidelines. As I said, we saw it week one. There was a 3rd and 1, I believe, yesterday where they went with Brees Hall and didn't get it. When they did go to Braylon Allen on the 3rd and 1, and again, this is all off the top of my head, so I might be missing one here and there. But the one I can recall, Braylon Allen did get the first down. So Dan Leberfeld of Jets Confidential sent out a tweet saying this, and I clicked on the link. It's a subscription, but I recommend it. I've been a subscriber to Jets Confidential for years now. Remember reading as a kid when I was still living in New York. Dan does a really nice job. I like Dan because Dan doesn't do the flashy clickbait, crazy takes and crazy claims. And Dan just says, like, here's an idea. Hey, why don't, and it's like grounded in sanity and logic, whether you disagree with him all the time, regardless. He's like, hey, here's an idea. So the thing Dan pitched yesterday was, is it time for Joe Douglas to get involved and have a word with Robert Saleh? I believe he said higher ups, like, let the owners and the GM sit down with Robert Saleh. And it really pertains mostly to Douglas because Douglas is the one, along with Saleh, whose job is on the line here. And imagine being Joe Douglas and handing Robert Saleh Braylon Allen to get you through short yardage situations and see Saleh not only not use Braylon Allen, but get asked by the media after the game week one, hey, why didn't you use Braylon Allen? And Saleh, as we talked about this yesterday, Saleh says, yeah, that's something to think about. Here we are 3 weeks later. Again, not using Braylon Allen. Gets asked again. I believe it was Dan both times. Why not use Braylon Allen? Oh, yeah, that's something to look at. Well, look at it and make a decision. But really, Joe Douglas at this point, would he be out of line to sit down with Saleh and say, Rob, I got you this guy for these situations. Like, I got you a Phillips screwdriver for Phillips screws, and you're showing up with a hammer. Well, I should have used the analogy the other way. Braylon Allen being the hammer. Here's, like, I don't know how much easier Joe Douglas can make it. And Robert Saleh is just taking this weapon he's been given and not you. And listen, I think Xavier Gipson can be a useful receiver on this team, but he shouldn't be a guy who's lining up on the boundary against a cornerback where there's a clear size mismatch and throwing the ball deep down the field. You have Mike Williams. Mike Williams is one of the few guys right now who is doing what you expected him to do. Garrett Wilson isn't. Brees Hall isn't. Xavier Gipson isn't, but that's because of the way you're using these guys. Mike Williams is the guy you brought in to win jump balls, and he's winning jump balls. And then I see a deep ball, one of the few deep shots they take, and it's to Xavier Gipson with the corner towering over him. Joe Douglas, your job's in jeopardy too. Listen, Joe Douglas, I've said this a million times, he's been better at his job than Robert Saleh. He's been really good. But again, this isn't to say Douglas has been perfect. This is to say, look at the talent on this roster. As I, just talked about Mike Williams, he can play. Garrett Wilson can play. For some reason, right now, isn't playing well. And I'm not jumping off the band. I've seen several fans. People need to chill out. Whether it's on Twitter or Jet Nation, I see people, oh, these guys suck too now. They suck. Garrett sucks. Priest, these guys aren't good. Yes, they are. There's clearly something going on. You don't go from playing at the level these guys have played at to just showing up and not being able to gain a yard. It's ridiculous. Heartland says Jets don't use personnel properly, don't call the right plays at times. I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, listen, no play is designed to fail, right? I think sometimes we lean too much on that, on play calling, because, and I've heard others say, you listen to former players, they say, look, man, every play is designed to work. If everyone did their job, every play would work. But really, the Jets do make it harder on themselves. And that's, like I said, Gibson over Williams, Brees over Braylon. And even if you wanted, even if it wasn't the ridiculous size advantage that it is between Braylon and Brees, like Brees is averaging 0.4 a carry in this game. And Braylon's well over that. Just feature him. They said it on the broadcast. From this point on, this should be Braylon Allen's game. And what do? And then you get to the final drive. You need a field goal to win, and you go empty backfield, 5 wide, throw 2 incomplete passes, and then ask your kicker to kick a field goal in the rain. It was one of those situations where I could not believe what I was watching. Let alone the first time, I was like, what are they doing here? And then they line up and you're like, all right, they're going to run it here. Hopefully they get 8 or 9. And then they line up 5 wide again and throw it. And then, okay, all right, go. And it's one of those, I'm watching the game and I'm thinking, clearly I'm wrong here. That I'm, because listen, we all make mistakes, right? And I'm watching this game thinking, I must be doing the math wrong. I'm thinking this is like a 50-yarder. Clearly it's like a 37-38, or they wouldn't be doing this. And then they line up, 50-yard attempt. 50-yard attempt. In the wet turf, right? The rain may have subsided by then, but all the balls are wet by then. So wet football, wet turf, 50-yard attempt. You don't run the ball to try to gain a few yards and get your kicker closer. Absolutely. I mean, again, it's nuts. But Joe Douglas, again, the Richard says Douglas picked Becton over Wirfs. He did, and Becton looked like a superstar in year 1. Zach over Penei Sewell. They needed a quarterback. Zach was the consensus number 2. Dumped Darnold for Zach. Darnold was terrible as a Jet. It was time for him to go. They were in a bad spot with him. So yeah, every GM makes mistakes, Richard, and every one of Joe Douglas's mistakes that you've listed. Again, people act like Joe Douglas was out on a limb on this stuff. Like nobody else predicted. Like nobody in the world thought Mekhi Becton might be an elite tackle. And like he didn't look like an elite tackle before he got injured. He did. Zach Wilson was the consensus number 2 quarterback in the class, and they needed a quarterback. Again, Darnold was pushing up against free agency and wasn't going to have enough time to show whether or not he was good. So if you didn't take a quarterback, you'd be stuck with Darnold and even either a gross overpay or letting him walk and not having a quarterback ready to go. And let's not pretend Darnold got better right away. It took Darnold 3-4 years and time under Shanahan in San Francisco to finally get his act together, potentially. And good for Darnold. I'm happy for him. But yeah, I'm not going to do the hindsight thing. I'm not going to. Daniel Jeremiah had Mekhi Becton going in the top 5. I said before the draft, Becton could be the pick at 11. There were tons of experts who, I spoke to a former O-line coach who said he didn't think that Wirfs was going to be a tackle, or that he was going to be a right tackle or a guard. So a lot of people were wrong about a lot of things. If Becton couldn't play, that's a different story. But Becton, before Greg Van Roten blew his knee out, we saw what he could do. He looked like he was going to be a dominant force for years to come. And everybody loved the Becton pick after year 1. And then we do the hindsight thing that it was obvious. No, 100 pounds overweight. Incorrect. Not when he was drafted. He did add weight after being drafted. Darnold would have been owed a lot of money if they kept him. Exactly. That was the thing, Harlan, is that Darnold, they would have had to have made a decision on exercising his option at a time where they still wouldn't have known if he was any good or good enough to pay that much or you're not going to give him a long-term deal on that spot either. I think with Darnold, a big part of it was the timing. They didn't have if they'd had an extra year to evaluate him, they may have let him hang around. But I think it was like if they'd played him that year and he was okay-ish, even if he'd shown some improvement, he still wouldn't have looked like a franchise guy who would have been up against free agency. And even the average middle of the road guys, we see the insane money they get. So right now, the Jets may have become the Jacksonville Jaguars. We've got a top 5 paid quarterback and not winning any football games. So again, that, like I said, every GM misses. That's why I don't care. Tell me, are there hits? And there are many, many hits with Joe Douglas. We're seeing it now with Jamie Sherwood, who's been one of the better players on this defense. Another Joe Douglas draft pick. We're seeing it with Joe Tippmann, who's playing really well. Michael Carter, one of the best nickelbacks in the NFL, if not the best nickelback in the NFL. Plenty of the Garrett and Brees thing. I don't listen. Apparently, it only took 3 or 4 weeks for a lot of Jets fans to bail on these guys and think they don't know how to play football anymore. Don't put me in that camp. I still think they're good. You want to bail on them, go right ahead. But listen, there's part of this where, and this, I'm not saying this isn't an excuse because I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's okay. Professionals should find a better way to work around this. But is this a situation where the complexities of the way Aaron Rodgers runs the offense, is this what's causing all the issues? Why is Douglas's record? Douglas's record is terrible for a few reasons, Richard. Let me break it down for you. When he took over, he had a UFL roster, and he took over after the offseason. So there was no draft, no free agency. He took over a minor league roster that needed years to be torn down and rebuilt. It was torn down and rebuilt. Then last year, the expectation was playoffs. Some people said maybe Super Bowl. And Aaron Rodgers got hurt, and the Jets won 7 games. Think back to when the Colts had Peyton Manning. When he got hurt, the Colts won 1 game. Jets lost Rodgers. The Jets won 7 games. He came back this year. Richard says that at this point, what is his fault? I can go through a lot of things that are his fault. He gave up too much to get Aaron Rodgers. I said at the time, Aaron Rodgers, there were no other suitors. Aaron Rodgers was not injury prone, but an older guy who was coming off of an injury and was, it was only more likely that more injuries would follow. That was a bad job by Joe Douglas. So, some of his moves, some of the panic moves, signing Ryan Khalil, panic move that blew up in his face, but he didn't have a center and he felt like he needed one. Trading for, I mentioned the how much he gave up for Rodgers. That was a bad move. I think passing on Bowers was a bad move. I think you could have added a veteran tackle and given Aaron Rodgers another weapon to work with. So there are definitely some things that are Joe Douglas's fault. That's just off the top of my head. If I sat down and popped open a notebook, I'd find a lot more. But Joe Douglas has had some very bad picks. He's had some very bad free agent moves. He's had DJ Reed. He's had Quincy Williams. He got Quinnen Williams extended. The one thing that he doesn't get credit for, Joe Douglas, I think people forget, maybe they don't realize, because when GMs come in, they love putting their stamp on a team. Let's get rid of anything we have of value. Let's get rid of it and let me put my stamp. Let me accumulate picks. That's what he did with Darnold and Adams, which was a good move. There were reports from Adam Schefter that Joe Douglas was being offered multiple premium picks, multiple ones, if I'm not mistaken, for Quinnen Williams. And Joe Douglas said, no, thanks. This guy's got enough talent. We're keeping him around. So didn't trade him. So and I won't disagree with that, Rich. Hired Salah, which was a terrible move. But again, part of this whole process, part of the reason I backed off on the criticism of Robert Saleh this offseason is because I said, let's see how it goes from here. Like we say all the time, like players can get better. Can GMs and coaches not get better? Look at what happened to Joe Douglas. Look at that draft class, the Jamie and Sherwood class that I just mentioned, the Zach class. We talked about that recently. That class is a monster class. If you just talk in terms of guys who are good enough to play in the NFL and still in the league, all but 2 guys in that class are still in the NFL. A lot of them starting, and some of them primary backups. Not a lot of third string practice squad guys on that list. However, there were some character things. Elijah Moore was an issue. Michael Carter, it would appear, was an issue. And now you're seeing them take guys in more recent draft classes. We're not seeing a lot of that selfishness that we saw with Moore. So I think Douglas is evolving and getting better. Now, listen, and actually, here's another one, Richard. let me give you some more criticism for Joe Douglas. He has treated these last 2 drafts. I mean, this year was a little bit more acceptable, but last year's draft was a terrible approach. Even though we got Will McDonald, and Will McDonald looks like he's going to be a great player, Joe Douglas treated last year's class like he only needed backup players. He should have been taking guys who could play right away. I said it before. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, the number 3 receiver in the NFL from that class is Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I said should have been the pick in that spot. Because, again, Will McDonald, and I've said all along, is going to be a good player. I have no problem with Will McDonald, the football player. But for what this team was supposed to be last year and what they are again this year, they're supposed to be a win-now team. Last year's pick 11 should have been Jackson Smith and Jigba, who would have been an immediate contributor on offense, who would have helped this team get to the playoffs, again, had Aaron Rodgers remained healthy. So Joe Douglas's approach to last year's draft, like, oh, we're ready for a Super Bowl, so I'm just going to draft a bunch of backups. That was poorly done by Joe Douglas. This year, maybe not a whole lot better. Again, talented players, but Olu Fashanu, who, by the way, didn't look very good yesterday. Waiting for the all-22. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Like, I say all the time with PFF, their grades aren't, the be-all, end-all, but they do put some valuable stuff in there. They will tell you how many hits, how many sacks, how many pressures did an offensive lineman allow. That's what I want to see on Olu Fashanu. I counted several. He had at least one penalty. He had another. Go back and watch that game. Olu had a false start that he got away with. So Olu Fashanu did not play well at all. And Joe Douglas drafted a backup lineman with the 11th pick. I would have taken a day 1 17-week starter in Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers, right now, unless something changed yesterday, the number 1 nobody catches a higher percentage of catches of targets than Brock Bowers does. He catches everything that's anywhere near him. That would be huge. Do you think the Jets could use that right about now? So Joe Douglas has not been perfect, but he has brought in enough good talent. And again, Olu, I'm not saying Olu's not good. I'm not saying he's not going to be good. I think he's going to be a very good player. I just, part of my concern with taking him was, what if he struggles early? What if they need him early and he struggles early? And that's exactly what happened. O-line got killed. They did. Denver blitzed the hell out of him, and the Jets looked like they weren't ready. The coaches can say all they want that they didn't, they didn't do anything that surprised us. Well, you looked pretty surprised with the way some of the blitzers were coming through there yesterday. And the Jets stopped blitzing. They blitzed the previous week. I understand you don't want to be predictable, but as I said pregame, blitz the hell out of Bo Nix until he shows he can beat it and then stop. But maybe try to force an interception. I mean, this defense, I don't want to knock them. They give up 10 points and 60 yards passing. You can't ask for a lot more than that. But Bo Nix, you come in, you think he's gonna get a couple of picks, and it just didn't happen. Let's see. He decimated our D line for what? We cannot stop the run. Well, again, I think, and I've said all offseason, that was my number one concern. My number one concern coming into the season was the Jets' ability to stop the run up the middle. Now, you've been without Lecky Fotu, and I also said the Jets should have used the draft. So here's another thing we can knock Douglas for. He should have brought in another DT aside from Lecky Fotu. I know they picked up Leonard Taylor, who's a really good UDFA who made this roster, who I think can be a player, but I meant like run stuffer type. You let Al Woods walk, Quentin Jefferson walked. Those guys should have been replaced. I don't feel like they were, but was this a matter of the Jets coaching staff feeling like we can do what we need to with the guys we've got? So yeah, some missteps, and they're probably, I would imagine, envisioning a healthy roster and playing from ahead an awful lot where teams aren't going to be running the ball as much. But as long as the offense, if the offense is going to perform like they did yesterday, then you're going to have some problems. You're going to, why wouldn't a team keep running the ball? They couldn't throw it. I know I said Brock couldn't throw it. Bo Nix couldn't throw it. So ugly game all around. Yes, Joe Douglas has made mistakes. I just listed many of them, but he's done it because here's the thing. We've become so accustomed to GMs only making mistakes, and every GM, pick your favorite GM in the NFL. Again, Rich, we'll agree to disagree. Like I said, he took over when the roster was built. There were no moves to be made. That team stunk, and they played like they stunk. Then he tore it all down. You ever have a messy house, messy bedroom, and it needs to be cleaned up, and the best way to do it is to make it worse? Like drag everything out and get it all out in the open. and then throw out what you don't need and keep what you do need and put stuff away. Gonna get worse before it gets better. That's what this was. He walked in the door, garbage roster, had to clear up take the couple of talented players he had and trade them for some picks and tear it all down and then build it back up. And right now, from 1 through 53, if you look at this roster, there's not that many holes. Every team, and that's the other part. Every team in the NFL has holes. Every single team. This Jets team has holes. The Chiefs, they have holes. Nobody's going 17-0. Nobody's going to be ranked number 1 in every category. But the Jets' biggest hole is at head coach, where, yes, Joe D did hire Robert Saleh. Do you not give Joe D a chance to learn from that and say, you know what? Rather than go with a player's coach, a buddy guy, let's get an X's and O's, and listen, we'll see who shakes loose. Maybe Vrabel's out there. Vrabel, better than Saleh, might do a good job here. And the Vikings didn't rebuild in a year. You're going to tell me that the Vikings had no good players before this year on their roster? Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. Who was Joe Douglas's Jordan Jefferson? Who was his Hawkinson? Who was his Addison when he took over? He had a selfish box safety and a quarterback with some potential. And he traded them to get some picks. And he had year 1 Quinnen Williams. That was it. He had 4 or 5 guys worth keeping. So, no, the Vikings were not rebuilt in a year. The Vikings had Jefferson, Addison, and Hawkinson to build around. Those are 3 really good players. All 3 of those guys way better than anybody on the Jets roster that Joe Douglas had. And that's the thing. And this is the same thing with the Jets, right? There will be fans who don't pay attention to the Jets. If their head coach wasn't an idiot, and if the Jets, won 12 games this year because they had a competent head coach and this talent, there would be fans out there who don't follow the Jets who would be saying, look at the Jets. They did it in 1 year. They were so bad last year and then they were good this year. Why can't everyone do it in 1 year? It doesn't happen in 1 year. There have to be some pieces in place. When Douglas took over, there were no pieces in place. And so so that's what I was saying. Took over garbage, tore it all down. By last year, they were expected to be a contender. Rodgers gets hurt. It all falls apart, as it all falls apart for every team when their quarterback gets knocked out for the season. And now that brings us to this year. And they're sitting at 2-2. So, look, if they win 5 games this year, then everyone gets fired. But if they don't, if they win 10 or 11, and I know after a loss, it never feels that way. When you lose a game, you're never going to win another one. When you win a game, you're never going to lose another one. The reality of the matter is, or the fact of the matter is, but again, Richard, I'm not. I don't know the Vikings roster up and down, but I'd be willing to bet that they don't have 47 new players on the roster from 2 years ago. I would feel safe in saying the Vikings haven't added 47 new guys to the roster in the last 2 years. There's more in place there than we're pretending. So back to Salah. He's got to deploy guys in position, put guys in position to succeed. And this is a fun conversation, Richard. I'd like to stay on topic, but yeah, look at Parcells. Look at Parcells. Look what Parcells inherited. Look what Rex inherited. Compare those rosters to the thing Joe Douglas inherited. Dude, Parcells had Aaron Glenn, Mo Lewis, Keyshawn Johnson, Ray Mickens, Victor Green, Marvin Jones, Mo Lewis, I think I said already. He had players. He was a defensive-minded head coach who had a lot of good defensive players. And then he brought in a veteran quarterback in Vinny, right? Like Parcells, look at the O-line Rex inherited. What were the main pieces that Rex brought in? Jim Leonard and Bart Scott to make the calls on defense. So there was a foundation in place to go out and win. Neither of those teams added 45 players in 2 years. Parcells was no idiot. He looked at that Jets roster and he was like, I could win over there. Like, Kotite's a moron. And they have some real, like I said, Green, Glenn, Marcus Coleman. Well, Coleman may not have really come on by then. I can't remember. But yeah, they had some players. Parcells knew what he was doing. So again, anyway, speaking of head coaches, back to Robert Saleh, back to 2024. Salah met with the media today, said, we'll go over his comments real quick. He's got some ideas about penalties. I don't know. I mean, took him 5 years, but apparently Robert Saleh has some ideas and how he's going to stop guys. We're going to try to clear their minds pre-snap. So after 5 years of penalties, Robert Saleh thought of something last night. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Sees no issue with Brees Hall. He thinks he's just as explosive as always. Just had a bad day. Cadence. I thought this would happen. He backtracked on Cadence. Salah said yesterday that maybe Cadence was the problem. Aaron Rodgers clearly didn't like that and said maybe we just hold guys accountable. So Salah said today, cadence is part of what we do. Got to have it. We're always going to use it. So he backed right off of that. He said he doesn't see any need for Rodgers to miss time. I would wait on that. He said it's normal wear and tear. I think it's normal wear, and you just got smacked around 15 times by an opposing defense. Tyron Smith, listen to this number. Zach Rosenblatt tweeted this earlier. Tyron Smith has allowed 3 sacks in 4 games. The last time he allowed 3 sacks in a season was 2017, and that was over the course of a full season. He's on pace to allow like double-digit sacks this year. Um, yeah, what are you gonna do? What's the guy's name again? The head coach, not the head coach, the I don't know, Carter, O-line coach. Anyway, um, Tyron Smith, yeah, like I said, Lucky Fotu may return to practice this week. That would help. Said the touchdown was poor communication. It's pretty obvious, when a receiver standing in the back of the end zone and no defenders within about 12 yards, there's normally some poor communication there. Asked about Malachi Corley, what he needs to do to get on the field. It's got to be better. Coaches have to coach him up. Corley has some guys in front of him right now. Totally understand. And let's see. Said there were some sacks yesterday where Aaron Rodgers held onto the ball too long. Wasn't totally on him. So is that Dagata? I don't have my glasses. Sorry. Yeah, Dagata J, the Jets motivator. He says same old Jets. Yeah, listen, it's got that feeling, but enough talent here to believe that they will. That listen, they're gonna. And the other thing is too, and this is something I had to sort of be honest with myself this morning. We're only a few games in. We don't know which teams are what right now. I'm not. Listen, Robert Saleh says Denver's a top 5, top 3 defense. Let's see. If we're 3, 4, 5 weeks from now and Denver is beating the hell out of everyone on defense, you know, I mean, a little easier to accept. Still a loss, still a game you should have won. I'm not saying the loss. I mean, just the overall performance. You still should have won that football game. But maybe things don't feel as dire if they do that to some other teams. But that doesn't, it's sort of, it's kind of meaningless. But at the same time, it makes you think, all right, maybe it's just not that the Jets were terrible. Maybe the other team did have something to do with it. And look, I said before the game that I thought Denver had some really good players on defense. JFM had himself a good game. I've always liked Benito. I liked him coming out. So, we talked about some of their linebackers and edges and how they might be able to give the Jets offensive tackle some trouble, and they did. Ricky J says, no way Gibson's better than Corley. Refuse to believe that. Yeah, Ricky, it's a good point. Again, even if you just use Corley on the stuff he excelled at in college and let him get comfortable, he would certainly be a better option than Gibson in those spots. And as Degata says, most teams are 2-2 right now. It's true, and I get that, but the thing is, this year is supposed to be like this Jets team is supposed to be good enough to win. You're at a point, you've got the talent to win the games you're supposed to win, beat the teams you're supposed to beat. You're an 8-point favorite. Yes, you're 2-2. Yes, we're used to being 0-4, 1-3 right now, but you should be 3-1. It was nice to see the Bills get their doors blown off, though. That was good to see. Outcoached again, says Rich. As you know, that's the standard here. Bills, Dolphins both won't be winning a Super Bowl. Listen, Jets Super Bowl, regardless of the Bills and Dolphins. Like, do you see Robert Saleh out coaching Andy Reid? I don't. You see him out coaching John Harbaugh or Jim Harbaugh. Not that I don't know that Jim will be in that position. Yeah, the Jets are at a disadvantage at head coach almost every week. Um, but there are some teams they'll be able to handle. Rookie head coaches, like Tennessee, um, coaches that aren't coaching for anything, like Bill Belichick, week 18 last year. So yeah, the Jets are going to win some games. They're gonna make up. I still think they're going to make the playoffs. But I'll tell you what, if Aaron Rodgers gets hit 15 times a week, they might not. But I don't think that's going to happen. We'll see. They need Morgan Moses back. They need Lecky Fotu back, and go from there. That'll wrap this one up. Just wanted to come on, talk about Leberfeld's comments. I think Leberfeld is in the right. I think he's got it right. I should say, if Joe Douglas with his job on the line feels the need to say, "Hey, Robert Saleh, um, you know, run Braylon Allen on the short yardage stuff, get the big bodies in." Like I said, Mike Williams is one of the only guys doing what he was paid to do when he came. Was doing what he was paid to do when he got here. So throwing those jump balls, keep throwing the ball down the field on one-on-ones and let him make plays because at least he's getting it done. So that'll wrap this one up. We will be back if any news breaks. I will not be around Thursday night. I got to work, folks. I'm want to go to this damn Jets Vikings game, and it's going to cost me all the money in the world. So I got to put in some extra shifts and some extra hours. So that'll wrap this one up. Have a good one, Jets fans.